Welcome back, everyone, to the deep dive. We like to really get into those texts that really matter, and today's no different. We're going to do a deep dive into the crucial setup, I would say, for one of the commissional works, and
Yeah.
that is, of course, the Bhagavad Gita. And what's really cool is we've got these excerpts that just focus on the electric moments right before the main teachings begin, like that moment right before a huge clash.
Yeah, you can almost think of it like the opening scene of a big drama, and
Yeah.
understanding who the characters are and the forces that have brought them to this point before things really kick off. So our goal today is not so much to dissect all the profound wisdom of the Gita, but to really understand the context in which it emerges. Like, who are these key players that are stepping onto the stage, and what are the powerful forces that have brought them to this breaking point? Because knowing this initial landscape is going to make everything that follows so much richer and so much more meaningful.
Okay, so let's get into it, the backstory. What's going on here? What events actually led to this point where war was pretty much unavoidable? The text lays out that after 12 years of exile and another year living incognito, the Pandavas basically just wanted their promised share of the kingdom back.
Yeah.
Seems pretty reasonable, right?
It does sound like a pretty reasonable request. However, the text really emphasizes just how absolutely firm Duryodhana was. He was the leader of the Kauravas, and he just refused to budge. He said he wouldn't concede even a tiny piece of land, not even, a needlepoint, not without a war.
Wow.
So this wasn't just a minor disagreement. It was a fundamental conflict about rights
Mhm.
and what was considered rightfully theirs.
Yeah, this was a big deal. And we see that the Pandavas' reaction wasn't just impulsive either. Like, they actually took the time to seek out their mother Kunti's blessing, and then they accept this just enormous challenge, right?
Yeah.
It really paints them as considered, even though they're essentially backed into a corner. What do you think is the significance of her permission? Why was it such a big deal?
I think in that cultural context, right, seeking a mother's blessing before undertaking a major endeavor like war, held immense weight. It signified respect, adherence to tradition, and it kind of gave their actions this moral grounding. So it really underscores the fact that they weren't entering into this conflict lightly.
Right. And once that decision is made, both sides start preparing for what was clearly going to be just an absolutely devastating war. Like, it was the point of no return.
Precisely, yeah, yeah. And now the narrative introduces this very compelling figure, and that is sage Veda Vyasa. The text tells us that he had this deep affection for the blind king Dhritarashtra, who was the father of the Kauravas. And out of this affection, Vyasa offers him something quite extraordinary.
I was going to say, this is pretty wild. He offers him divine sight. So imagine being able to see the entire battle as it's happening wherever you are. What do you think this tells us about Vyasa's capabilities?
Well, it definitely speaks to his spiritual power, but also I think it suggests an awareness of Dhritarashtra's limitations as a blind king, right? And maybe also a desire to give him some way to directly experience these events, even if it was just vicariously.
And then Dhritarashtra says no.
Right.
He's like, I've lived my whole life without sight, and I can't bear to see the slaughter of my family. I thought that was so powerful. It's really very human, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it reveals a very human side to Dhritarashtra, I think.
Yeah.
And, his willingness to kind of remain ignorant, to avoid this incredible pain of seeing his own family destroyed. But at the same time, his desire to know what's happening is still there. So Sage Vyasa comes up with another way. He grants divine vision to Saijaya. Now, this is going to allow Saijaya not only to see and hear everything on the battlefield, but also to perceive the thoughts of the warriors.
Wow.
Yeah.
So it's like this whole other level. So he basically becomes Dhritarashtra's eyes and ears and mind all in one. Like, he's on the scene.
Yeah, he's totally meted.
Wow, that's incredible. So he's sending back real-time updates to the king.
Exactly.
Back in Hastinapura. The text mentions that the battle commences on this sacred field of Kurukshetra, and that Saijaya is actually present there for 10 days. And then a really big thing happens. Bhishma, who's like this pivotal commander in the Kaurava army, falls.
Yes, wounded.
Saijaya has to go back and tell Dhritarashtra, who is just, completely grief-stricken by this news. And he begs Saijaya to give him all the details, like everything that has happened leading up to this point.
A full breakdown.
The play-by-play.
Yeah.
And so Saijaya narrates this very detailed account of the battle up to the 24th chapter of what's called the Bhishma Parva,
Right.
which sets the stage perfectly for this critical moment that we are leading up to. Because at the start of the very next chapter, chapter 25, Dhritarashtra asks this fundamental question to Saijaya. And this is the question that really marks the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita itself. What is that question?
The question is this. O Saijaya, assembled at the holy field of Kurukshetra, eager to fight. What did my sons and the sons of Pai-4 do?
So much weight in that one question, right?
Oh, yeah.
And the actual Sanskrit is Dhrutarishtra Vika Dharmaksetra Kurukshetra Samaveta Yutsaval Mama Kapaidaiskava Kima Kurvata Saijaya.
Right. And just for clarity, a very basic translation of that would be, Dhritarashtra said, on the field of Dharma, the field of the Kurus, when my people and the sons of Pendu had gathered, eager for battle, what did they do, Asanjaya?
So let's break this down a little bit, starting with those opening words, Kurukshetra and Dharmaksetra. The commentary really dives into the significance of those terms. What's the key takeaway there?
Well, so Kurukshetra wasn't just any old battlefield. The commentary tells us that the gods themselves performed these holy sacrifices there, and King Kuru actually did some very intense spiritual practice in that location. So the land is really imbued with a really deep spiritual significance, and this is why it's known as the field of righteousness or Dharmaksetra.
So this wasn't just about some earthly, conflict or squabble.
Right, exactly.
And what I thought was really interesting is the duality of the place. You have this word, setra, and it refers to the land of the Kurus. So it emphasizes that this is a family dispute over territory. But at the same time, it's also sacred. It's a place where righteous actions could actually lead to spiritual liberation. Like, that's pretty profound when you think about it.
It is.
This wasn't just like, oh, we need a place to fight, let's pick this one.
Yeah, it wasn't random at all.
It was very deliberate.
Right.
And they consulted these noble people. So clearly there's a lot of thought that went into choosing the location, not just for the worldly outcome, but for the spiritual outcomes as well.
Definitely.
So, the classic reasons for conflict, we're talking about land, we're talking about wealth, we're talking about power. And kings, historically, primarily fought over territory. So when you hear Kurukshetra, you immediately get a sense of what this is all about.
Right.
And the fact is, both Dhritarashtra's sons and Pandu's sons had a legitimate claim to this land.
Right.
The war really became unavoidable because the Kauravas refused to share.
Yeah, and then you add to that the fact that righteousness is such a central concept in Indian culture, right? So even warfare, which is obviously a very destructive act, is framed in this context of taking place on this field of righteousness. And the idea is that the warriors, regardless of which side they're on, have the opportunity to attain spiritual liberation through their actions on this sacred ground. So that combined use of Dharmaksetra and Kurukshetra together really underscores the dual nature of this conflict.
Now, this blew my mind. The commentary points out this really clever symbolic connection. The very first word of the first chapter is dharma, and the last word of the 18th chapter is mama.
Right.
Take the dar from the beginning and the ma from the end, and you get dharma again.
Yeah, it's beautiful, isn't it? It's a really beautiful literary device, and it really highlights that this concept of righteousness really frames the entire Bhagavad Gita. The suggestion is that the entire discourse falls within this overarching theme of Dharma, of following the path of what is right and fulfilling your duty according to its principles.
So it's like this reminder that all actions, from this perspective, should be guided by this concept of righteousness, and they should be performed without selfish motives for the well-being of all and in accordance with the scriptures.
And speaking of actions, I think it's important to remember just how unwilling to compromise Duryodhana was in all of this. Despite all these attempts to make peace, including Lord Krsna trying to personally mediate, he absolutely refused to concede even a tiny piece of land. And the Mahabharata, which is this larger epic, confirms this.
Right, so the Pandavas, they're basically forced into a corner. They have no other option but to fight for what is rightfully theirs.
Yeah, they've been pushed to this point.
And while both armies are there ready to fight, the text makes it clear that Duryodhana had this burning desire for this conflict. Like, he almost wanted it. And he's very, very clear about his goal to just seize the entire kingdom no matter what.
And his side is described as very eager to wage war.
In contrast, the Pandavas, while they were prepared to fight, they had this moral high ground of righteousness on their side.
Right.
So they were willing to endure hardship for the sake of justice. You even have Yudhishthira, who was initially reluctant because he understood how bad war was, and he actually ultimately agrees to fight. And I think it was really driven by this sense of duty and maybe even, influence from his mother as well. So we see this really stark contrast. The Kauravas, driven by this desire to take power unjustly, and the Pandavas, who were compelled to fight for what is right. And it sets up this huge ethical conflict, like this tension that's at the core of everything. Now, Dhritarashtra's opening question to me was really insightful because it really gives us a sense of his mindset going into this. The commentary points out his use of the word mamaka, which means my sons. But technically, this includes both the Kauravas and the Pandavas, because Dhritarashtra was the older brother of their father, Pandu. However, his separate mention of Pandava kind of reveals this deep-seated bias that he has for his own children. It's like he just can't bring himself to refer to them as a single group. He says, my sons, and then separately the sons of Pandu, which just highlights his partial perspective.
And it's a reminder that bias leads to conflict, not to harmony. You know, Dhritarashtra's own suffering and the eventual destruction of his entire family is a direct result of this partiality.
Yeah, and this is a huge theme throughout history and across cultures. Partiality, favoritism, it never ends well.
Right.
There's also the word eva, meaning also.
Right.
Dhritarashtra is not just asking what his own sons did, but also what the Pandavas, who maybe shouldn't have been involved in the war, were doing on the battlefield.
Yeah, it's like, even they are there, prepared for violence. You can almost feel that sort of like a question in his voice, right?
Like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So there's this anxiety in his question.
Definitely.
Now, before we get to that question, there's a really interesting moment where Duryodhana is sizing up the situation. The text mentions that he points out all the key Pandava generals to Dronacharya, almost to like provoke him, you know?
Yeah.
And then he goes on to praise his own warriors, probably to get their morale up. So he's definitely thinking strategically here.
Yeah.
Okay, so then we have this incredible moment where all the conch shells are blown. It starts with Bhishma. He blows his conch super loud, and then the whole Kaurava army joins in with this massive sound of conchs and trumpets. It's like this incredible audio representation of war is starting.
But then the focus shifts. So Sajaya, in verses 14 through 19, describes how the Pandavas respond. Krishna, who's their guide and supporter, he's seated right next to Arjuna in the chariot, and he blows his divine conch. And then all the Pandava brothers, Arjuna, Bhima, Yudhishthira, Nakula, and Sahadeva, all blow their conchs as well.
And the sound of their conchs is described as so powerful, so intense, that it literally shakes the hearts of Duryodhana's army. So you have this moment of just complete tension. The two sides are facing each other, they're ready, and it's about to begin. And right after this description of the conch, Saija begins to recount the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna. That's when the teachings of the Bhagavad Geeta really start. It's from the 20th verse onwards.
So Dhritarashtra's question in the 25th chapter is really like the bridge to this profound exchange.
And that question again was, what did they do? What did everyone do? The commentary actually explores three possible shades of meaning for the word kim, which means what? Doubt, reproach, and a genuine inquiry. So what's your take on those?
Okay, so if we think about it, Saja has already been reporting on the battle for 10 days, right? So I don't think Dhritarashtra is really doubting that the war has started.
It's happening.
Yeah, it's happening. And given that the fighting is already underway, I don't think he's necessarily blaming either side with this question at this exact moment.
So it seems like it really is this genuine question. He's asking Sajaya to recount all the events in detail and in order so he can understand how it got to this point.
Yeah, he wants the full picture.
And the appendix in the source offers a really deep insight, I think, into this whole conflict. And it boils down to attachment and aversion. And it's Dhritarashtra's distinction between my sons and Pandu's sons that really fueled this whole mess.
Right.
And it leads to war and all the horrible things that come with it. And the ultimate outcome, which is the death of all 100 Kauravas and the survival of all the Pandavas, really shows what happens when you have that partiality.
Yeah, and I love the analogy they use. It's like churning curds to get butter. So all that stirring that's happening in Dhritarashtra's mind from making that distinction leads to war and chaos. But that same kind of stirring internally for Arjuna is what leads to this incredible wisdom of the Gita. It's like that butter that emerges from all that churning.
It's a really beautiful image.
Yeah.
So Dhritarashtra's internal turmoil led to destruction, while Arjuna's internal turmoil leads to something beautiful.
Right.
Now, I really love how the text concludes with this praise for the Gita itself.
Yeah.
And I particularly love the way they describe Krishna, the flute-holder, the one who holds the reins, the stealer of hearts, the wearer of garlands, the upholder of Dharma, Arjuna's charioteer. These images are so vivid.
Yeah, and the Gita is described as a song sung by Lord Krsna completely drenched in this boundless compassion, and it offers this guidance on fulfilling your duty, on finding equanimity, on achieving enlightenment, on surrender, all for the benefit of humanity. You know, it's presented as this gift that shows us how to realize the divine, remove obstacles, and achieve this ultimate goal of God-realisation. It's huge.
And the author of the commentary even shares their own experience with the Gita. They talk about the spiritual benefits that they gained from meditating on it, from preparing their interpretation of it, which led them to this deeper understanding of the text. And they believe that others who do the same will also receive these spiritual blessings.
It's like a universal message.
Yeah.
The Gita is this text filled with compassion. It understands the truth about action, about knowledge, about renunciation, and about devotion. And it's filled with these subtle meanings, and it's something that seekers can really dive deep into and explore. And ultimately, it leads to bliss.
So to sum it all up, we've explored the very tense, very pivotal moments that happen right before the Bhagavad Gita begins. This war